Hello and welcome to another Infinity the Game Battle Report. Today I am playing Toha. Even though I was saying I would keep playing Rama Task Force for a while, I actually got to take out my Toha again for the first time in a while, which was very nice. In fact, a friend of mine just bought a huge Toha collection and he asked me if I could showcase the faction to him a bit. He is still mostly playing Kestrel and Rama Task Force at the moment, but he definitely plans on playing those Toha models, but he just wanted to see what they looked like on the table before he had to play them himself. And so I was very happy to oblige, especially since I had been itching to paint up the old N2 Nima Satar model that I was very lucky to obtain a while ago, as well as use her, because she is an Actros officer, to proxy her as an Actros. Ever since I saw the new Actros loadout with the Vulcan shotgun +1 burst for 32 points, I was like, are Actros good now? Because I've never seen anyone play one in N4, and I've never played one in N4, but 4 dice on a Vulcan shotgun on a model with BS13 and effectively 3 wounds sounded like something that could really do work. The mission is Mindwipe. I'm playing against Kestrel. My friend Carsten, he was considering to play Vanilla Pano or Swallowheimer, but he ended up playing Kestrel again. And so I found it to be a very nice test of my Toha in N5 going up against an amazing faction like Kestrel and see how they did, especially in Mindwipe. The list that I'm playing is mostly the usual Toha pieces with the additions of some new pieces that I feel are very common in my lists in N5. One of them is the Tarsos. I really like the paramedic profile. I know the Spitfire is probably a really good pick as well. A burst 4 weapon on a 2 wound drop trooper with super jump can allow you to get some really nice angles and do some work. But I prefer the paramedic in most missions simply because the option to have like superior deploying specialist with 2 wounds is just very, very valuable in a lot of missions, especially for a faction like Toha that usually has a bit of a problem with mobility. There's not a lot of forward deploying or infiltrating stuff. There's not a lot of fast moving or super jumping units. Pretty much the Tarsos is the only one, apart from the Kera Preceptors, who are not specialists. And so in this mission as well, I am very happy to have a 24-point drop trooper that has decharges. In a mission like Mindwipe, that is just your ultimate piece to drop him in the late game and destroy those servers. Apart from that, we have the aforementioned Actros in the list in a duo with a Macau. I felt like that was the best place for the Macau. I don't tend to use 2 or bring 2 anymore, but I usually still have 1 just to have some CC in my list. In that game as well, it would turn out to be very useful to have one of them. And since my Actros wants to fight in close quarters, I decided that's where the Macau goes as well. Then there's the Sukiul HMG standard piece as well, to have some firepower, to be able to put down some TR bots or stuff like that. Also in a duo, in this case, with Aelis Kisan, who would be my Uber hacker, the one that gets the extra irregular order and the data erasure program to go after the servers as well. Then there's actually a war driver to have some redundancy in case Aelis Kisan goes down unexpectedly, to still have a hacker who gets a hacking bonus for activating the consoles, as well as just in general. I like the war driver in Toha. I think 14 points for a hacker with 0 pain and a boarding shotgun and a regular order is very nice. Even in missions where there is no hacking bonus, to have some basic hacking protection, just something that can isolate something that has structure, because yes, there is obviously a diplomatic delegate in this list, but she obviously can't user erasure against structure models, and so I like to have the war driver for 14 points as well, if I can afford the SWC, which I can in this list. The other thing that happens in Group 1 is a Greif operator, because again, I had the SWC. I also like the fact that there's at least some MSV in my list, which, if you don't bring a Gaurel, which I never do, I'm not a fan of that profile, is otherwise non-existent. And just in general, the Greif is an amazing unit and something your opponent has to respect. Then there are 2 Chaksa, because I like being able to coordinate them if I need to and do a sensor run with them. Usually I also have Kaori in my list, but I felt like in this mission I was able to forego them. Yes, of course, EM mines would have been nice to protect my servers, but I wrote the list before I knew that I was playing Mindwipe, and they were already not in there. When I found out that I was playing Mindwipe, the only changes I did was adding the hackers, or I think the second hacker, i.e. this Kisan. Often my setup is 2 Chaksa Auxilias and then 2 Kaori with Mine Layer. In this case, I didn't have them. That was fine. Then the Delegate in Group 1, and then in Group 2 we have also the standard pick of a Takyu Lieutenant. Yes, Takyus are also not as strong anymore as they once were, but I still usually take at least one. Just the fact that I have Mirror Ball on a unit that has enough orders on themselves in the second combat group to just reliably give me those Eclipse templates is just something I don't want to leave the house without. Toha really relies on visibility control, and yes, there are other ways to get those Eclipse templates down, but I still like the Takyu the most for that. I like the 2 Lieutenant orders. There are not a lot of other options in Toha to get additional orders in your list, and so yeah, still standard piece for me, Takyu Lieutenant, standard combi rifle in Group 2. Then there's my defensive Horus in Group 2, which is the Sukyo K1 Sniper and the 2 Kailta. I also still really like to run 3 Symbiomates. I just feel very safe in knowing that I have this extra level of protection, and I'm taking the Chain of Command model anyway, since I'm not running the Takyu Chain of Command as much anymore. And especially in this list, he had to go in favor of the Ektros. I was basically required to take the Chain of Command Kailta as well, and so we have 3 Symbiomates and 1 Symbiobomb, and the aforementioned War Driver in this group, and then a motorized Bounty Hunter. So as you can see, this is a 9-6 split. I am often trying a split like this just in case there is a chance for me to move something in the first group. Obviously, my first group already has an open spot since the Gao Tarso starts off the table, but I still like to have some extra orders in the second group. Also, I'm not that big of a fan of bunching all my irregulars in one group, so this way this thing allowed me to have one in each. And then I like also to have my ARO pieces in Group 2, so in case they go down, they don't take orders away from my main combat group. And since my ARO in this game was a Horus, and the Takul is also a standard in Group 2, and then the Motorized Bounty Hunter, we are already at 5 units, and then the War Driver became the 6th unit because I wanted to make sure that I had a hacker in each group, just in case that one group, for some reason whatsoever, wasn't able to press a console, that I still had the chance that my second group would be able to do that, which would actually come into play in this game. Now, if we look at Karsten's list, we can see something that if I had seen this before, I would have been terrified. I'm surprised every single time to see just how many scary guns Kestrel can fit into a list easily and then still have a lot of support, which we can see right from the beginning. There's a Hetkari in its lieutenant version, which I have never seen before, but I guess it is something you can do quite comfortably with a Chain of Command Magistrate. The Hetkari is in a Horus with a Firefly NCO, so you can also just spent that lieutenant order on the fire team. Nice synergy there. You then have Bipendra with the tactical awareness order, which means you just have 5 orders on that link team alone. Then we have a Griffin HMG in a duo with a Fennec forward observer. Also nice little team. Gives you, if you want to, a disco baller. It gives you an MSV piece and just another scary BS-14 gun. And then the third gun, the Black Air, also in this case, I guess it's something that Karsten wanted to try out. The K1 Marksman version instead of the multi-sniper. He was positioned in a way that made use of that shorter range band. In this time a Horus with 2 Fusiliers to get that special die, since he doesn't count as a Fennec Fusilier, a Paramedic and a Hacker. Then there's a Beast Hunter, which I would falsely identify as a Yamabushi, and then finally a Flash Pulse bot. Nice package there of just 3 scary guns and a bunch of support. And then in group 2, the Magistrate in a duo with a Jackal, which makes the Jackal regular. Then another irregular Jackal, the famous EM grenade launcher forward deploying mine layer one. And then 2 total reaction bots with Thunderbolts. If I were to critique this list, I would say that the fact that the Firefly engineer is in a fire team that would also be deployed very far away from both total reaction bots makes the engineer kind of useless. Yes, he can potentially fix the head Kari should he get isolated or mobilized. And so that's a quite nice package together with Bipendra. You have a doctor and an engineer with you. But I feel if I take a total reaction bot, especially if I take 2, I want to be able to get them back up. I feel like this is the whole purpose of a total reaction bot. It dies in turn 1, and with a little bit of luck, it can utilize its 2 unconscious states to stay on the board. And then you have an engineer somewhere with 1 or 2 pal bots, and either the engineer himself spends an order on himself and moves towards one of the bots and then activates the pal bot and moves to the second bot, just in order to bring them back up. They have remote presence, you can re-roll with command tokens on them, because a total reaction bot becomes much scarier in turn 2 or even turn 3, when your opponent has lost some firepower pieces, and it just usually becomes much harder for them to deal with them. And even if they still have the pieces, just another order they have to spend. And that could become a critical failure, because total reaction bots are prone to crit fishing. And the fact that he invested the points into 2 of them without any chance to really get them back up, to me feels like a bit of a lack of synergy. And the only other point I would say is mission specific. He told me he had written this list before he knew the mission, and then he just decided to keep it like that. But obviously there is just 1 hacker in this list. And yes, 1 hacker is theoretically enough to boop that 1 console. You just need 1, and he does get the hacker bonus. And even whip 12, that's 2 dice on 15s in Mindwipe. That is pretty reliable. But it also means that's his only hacker. If I kill him, it's also his Uber hacker, because he's the only one who can be the Uber hacker. Also, the fact that he's in a fire team means that he won't be able to spend that irregular order for the entire game unless he breaks out of that fire team. To be fair, I did the same with my Uber hacker. I probably should have elected the war driver instead of Aelis Kisan, because I also kind of didn't spend those orders on her, and I actually moved up the war driver, and she would have been much better at utilizing this thing. The reason I didn't was because I thought that I could spend it on Aelis to give her Cyber Mask, because she's a killer hacker, and use that to move up the board in a marker state. I did give her Cyber Mask at some point in the game, but I never moved her up. And that was mostly on the back of the fact that I wanted to keep the duo bonus on my Sukiul HMG. And so I guess, yeah, you could make the case that I made the exact same mistake. Lastly, what I feel this list lacked for a mission like Mindwipe is mobility. I was really expecting a Black Air parachutist deployment zone, because I felt like that would be the perfect piece for this mission. It has decharges. It can wait until the last turn, move in, and just kill 1 or 2 of the servers. Which, spoiler alert, would be exactly what I would try to do with my drop trooper. And I feel like drop troopers are incredibly useful in this mission specifically. And the fact that he neither brought a Banshee nor the Black Air paratrooper meant that he would have to trek across the board. and rely on the fact that his shooting pieces would clear enough of my pieces so the rest could move freely, mainly the Firefly Engineer or the Beast Hunter with his double action CC weapon. While this can work, my experience with Mindwipe is that I don't want to rely on that. I don't want to rely on having the orders in my second or third turn to just move all the way across the board with a 4-4 moving unit, or even a 6-4 moving unit in case of the Beast Hunter with her super jump, get through the front line of my opponent and find a way towards the servers. I find it so much easier to come in through the back line, either with a normal parachutist just outside the deployment zone, or a deployment zone parachutist, or a combat jumper who can kind of reliably make the jump. To be fair towards Carsten though, it's the first time he ever played Mindwipe, and I can confirm that the first time I played Mindwipe, I also ran into those things. It's just something you learn when you play a mission a couple times. You understand how it flows, what the rhythm is, and what kind of pieces you need to be successful. Today I didn't play at my own place, but we played at the local gaming group's place, and we got to play on a pretty decent table with the standard Corpus Belli terrain. Carsten won the roll-off and he chose first turn, which allowed me to choose the left side as my deployment zone, mainly because it allowed me to have an ARO position where my K1 sniper could see both of the consoles in the middle without being seen by the Black Air sniper. Also, just the fact that I could see both consoles in general, and I felt like I had the easier approach to the consoles. The way the servers were placed, it didn't really matter. They were both pretty open and pretty accessible in both deployment zones, so I just went with the left side. Carsten deployed first, and he deployed his Griffin on the building with the bridge in his deployment zone, standing up that he could just immediately take shots at me. His Black Air sniper was further down with not too many good fire lanes. He was kind of blocked by the tower in front of him. The two total reaction bots were on the big building on the top as well as on the ground on the bottom, of course, because he knew he had what first turn was planning on just moving her up towards the building and get a better position from there. And then his Horus with Bipendra and Fennec, actually his Hetkari was his reserve, so he just deployed the Hetkari and the Firefly at the very top of the board. The Magistrate and the Jacko were on the same building as the Griffin and the Fennec Observer, just further down the stairs, where all of those troops were able to basically defend the Magistrate and just having everything tucked away nicely. The forward deploying Jacko was on the bottom edge of the board, able to move forward towards the console or towards my deployment zone, whatever needed to be done. The Beast Hunter was on the upper side of the board, as close to the big tower there as possible. I actually thought I was very clever when I saw his deployment, thinking, okay, that's a Yamabushi. Well, if you really know Kestrel as a faction, I would have known that Yamabushis have only 4 inches of forward deployment. I did know that, but I just forgot that Kestrel gets Beast Hunters. I didn't know they did. So I was just assuming that to be a Yamabushi. I was mildly surprised when it turned out that it was a Beast Hunter. And so I countered his deployment with my K1 sniper at the bottom of my deployment zone on the building behind the bush in that spot that I just mentioned, where he would have amazing line of sight to both consoles. The 2 Kaltars were just on the ground, because at this point I wasn't sure if he would either bring in a Black Air or maybe the Red Eye. During my deployment I actually realized that he had put 14 troops on the table, and so I was very certain that there would not be a Black Air parachutist deployment zone killer hacker, which made me confident in deploying my troops a little bit more facing towards the front and protecting me from a possible red eye before he actually deployed the Hetkari. My Sukiel HMG was deployed in the middle of my deployment zone on the bridge, and I also decided to leave her standing up in ARO, which I usually don't do with my HMG. But in this case I just felt that there were so many powerful pieces, and I did bring the 3rd Simumate that she would be able to at least survive one round of shooting against the Griffin, even though the Griffin has MSV, just to cost him a couple more orders and to delay his first turn and his Alpha Strike into my zone. A lot of my pieces were basically thrown around her. Aelis Kisan was on the ground behind her, as safe as possible from a frontal attack, and the Ektros and the Makal went on the same building as the bridge was on to also prevent anything coming up there. If the Red Eye would have done a run, there would have been so many pieces looking her in the face that didn't have long-range guns, but that could still be scary and just tough. The Delegate was also on that whole building group in the middle, prone, but able to move forward if I needed that erasure to be further up. My War Driver and my Takyul were also positioned in a way that would allow me to throw Eclipse with the Takyul if it was needed, and then move up the War Driver and press the first console. Since I had Aelis Kisan pretty far back just to protect her, my plan was to boop the console with the War Driver and then, if needed, trek across the board with Aelis Kisan to hack the servers. My Chaksa were just protecting the edges of my deployment, one of them close enough to the Takyul to reload her in case she had to use her endgame in ARO. My reserve was actually the Greif. I waited until he deployed his reserve, which was his Ikari, and then I basically had to concede that there was no spot where my Greif would survive a first turn if I had placed him close to Karsten's stuff. And so instead I just put him on the tower in the middle where he would be safe enough, because the Greif has decharges and I just wanted to at least have the chance, depending on how the game developed, of using him in the late game, and for that I needed him to survive. We started the game. Since I saw a Magistrate in his deployment zone, I didn't try to dock any orders from him, because obviously Kestrel comes around with counterintelligence. Just let him start. We both buy speedballs, and it's actually pretty easy to sum up Karsten's first turn very quickly, because as it turned out, he basically just spent almost every single order of his first combat group on the Griffin, who tried to shoot my ARO pieces and just couldn't get through. It was really, really tough. I rolled 2 crits, once with the HMG and once with the K1 sniper. His Griffin actually went down at one point. All he managed to do was put my Sukyul prone, use up the Symbiote, and I go prone, and then after so many orders, and him actually he had to use his speedball to bring his Griffin back up, my Sukyul sniper is still standing there and he doesn't know what to do. He then finally elects to use his Jackal, his forward deploying Jackal from group 2, to make a run into my deployment zone and try to get rid of my Kalta and the Chaksa behind her with his, what is it, a chain colt or a light shotgun. He actually even tries to put the light shotgun into the back of my Sukyul sniper, but the dice are just not with him. I succeed on my dodges, make my armor saves, and at the end the poor Jackal isn't able to kill anything and goes unconscious herself. So he still has to get rid of the K1 sniper, and he tries to do it one more time and just spends one last order on the Griffin. And this time, finally, he gets, I think, 4 shots through, and I fail all 4 saves, and the K1 sniper just goes off the board. But oh my gosh, he was a hero, holding him up for so long. And so basically all that's left to do for him is just move around with his NCO in tactical order from his link team with the Hekari. Just move them a little bit further back, just protecting the back of his deployment zone, since he doesn't really want to move them forward at this point. And pass turn to me. Like I said, a very, very quickly summarizable first turn. I now have lost basically nothing. Apart from my Sukyul sniper, everything is still standing. And so I see a lot of stuff on his side that I am still able to shoot. My Sukyul HMG, if she stands up, can just directly get line of sight to one of his total reaction bots. I can also move to the other side of the bridge and shoot the second reaction bot, and if I move to a certain edge of the bridge, I would also be able to get line of sight to his blank air. And so that's what I do. Apart from spending the impetuous order to move my motorized bounty hunter forward, who, by the way, rolled +2 armor, and Karsten's Jackals, the one in his deployment zone, rolled +4 armor. And so after that, after the impetuous phase, my Sukiyo stands up, takes a shot against the total reaction bot, and puts her unconscious in one order. Then shoots the second total reaction bot, puts her unconscious in one order. By the way, in case you're wondering how that's possible, yes, Karsten spent an order on the total reaction bot to move it up the building and be in an ARO position there, just as I mentioned during his deployment. And then I move the Sukiyo back to the other end of the bridge where she gets line of sight to the blank air, spends one order, and puts the blank air unconscious. So as you can see, the dice are not really fair this game. Karsten, even though he was kind of advantageous in his firefights, yes, he was just rolling 14s and I was rolling 13s, but still he had 5 dice against my 2. He just had to spend all of his orders just killing 1 unit, and I just put 3 units unconscious in 3 orders. Sometimes the game is just not fair. Just though that first turn and the beginning of my first turn kinda decided the game. It wasn't impossible for Karsten to come back from this, but it was really hard. After my very successful shootout with my Sukiyo HMG, I then decide, okay, what else can I do with this first combat group? I know that I can easily just press the button now that all his AROs are subdued in my second combat group, so I try to be even more aggressive. I move the motorized bounty hunter around the corner of the tower so she gets line of sight to his camouflage marker, trying to discover it and failing. And so instead, since that doesn't work, and that's the last order of my second combat group, okay, now I realize actually, yeah, I already did the run with the war driver towards the console, pressed the button, and then put the war driver up on a building and prone, pretty close to his deployment zone in case he wanted to bring out any other heavy infantry around that corner, or his hacker. Yes, and the last order is spent by the motorized bounty hunter, and so I only have my group 1 left, but I still have a bunch of orders left, and so I decide to try my luck with my Greif operator. And the Greif operator, I don't even have to move him. The way he's standing, he can actually get line of sight there. What happens is that Karsten is like, okay, fine, I am going to reveal and put my heavy flamethrower on you. And I'm like, oh, so it's not a Yamabushi, it's a Beast Hunter. Well, that sucks. So instead of shooting at him, I dodge, and I actually roll another crit, successfully dodge out of line of sight of the Beast Hunter, then decide to just ignore him completely, climb down the tower, and then just have enough orders to move onto the bridge, get line of sight to both his Fennec and his Griffin, which for some reason he put the back to me. I think he really expected me to drop something in his deployment zone. And so I get a shot in the back with my combi rifle, and I manage to put the Griffin unconscious again. The Fennec, however, survives. I leave the Greif prone on the bridge, and then with the very last order, converting the irregular from my diplomatic delegate, put him in suppressive fire. I then still have 2 lieutenant orders for my Takuo, who didn't have anything to do. She didn't need to throw Eclipse, and so I just move her down the building towards just in a little bit of a forward position and put her in suppressive fire as well, and then I passed her. Karsten's second turn is understandably a bit constrained now. He lost his Black Air, he lost his Griffin, he lost both of his total reaction bots, he lost his forward deploying Jackal. The only guns he has left are his Headkari. So he actually uses the Headkari after he gets rid of my motorized bounty hunter, which takes him actually a little bit. He first tries to flash pulse the thing with his flash pulse remote, succeeds, and it's stunned. And so only then he moves into CC with his Beast Hunter. but it takes him 2 orders. I actually make 2 saves. The first time he hits me with his double action CC weapon, and then only the second time the thing goes unconscious. And so then he can bring around his Hetkari, Horus, all the way around the building, and first get line of sight to my Sukiul HMG, and in that firefight actually put a wound on her. She goes prone and gutses down the bridge, so she cannot be seen at all anymore. And then he takes another shot at my Takyu lieutenant in suppressive fire, who also still has a Symbionate. And for once he gets lucky and just puts her unconscious in a single order. But I actually failed 2 of my saves, even through the Symbionate. He doesn't leave the Hetkari on ARO, he pulls him back a little bit behind the building. Then he actually activates the Beast Hunter again, who jumps up the building and then crosses the bridge towards my Sukiul and my Makaul and my Ektros. Asks me, what do you want to do? And I just declare dodge with all of them, and in another very lucky turn of events, all my dodges succeed, while he puts the heavy flamethrower over the Makaul and the Sukiul, and the Makaul dodges into CC with the Beast Hunter. And so that ends the Beast Hunter run. And so finally he just activates the second Jackal and lets her fight my Greif. Yes, he does it with the template, he does it with the boarding pistol, so the Greif goes unconscious, but the Greif still is able to shoot at the Jackal, and the Jackal goes unconscious as well. But hey, at least he managed to get rid of the Greif. Now, this turn was a bit more successful for Karsten. He put down a couple of pieces, but even then, his Beast Hunter was by far not as successful as he would probably wanted her to be. Yes, she put down the Greif, yes, she put down the Motorized Bounty Hunter, but the fact that I made all of my dodges with my pieces in my deployment zone means that now his Beast Hunter is tied up in CC with my Makaul, and that is not good for the Beast Hunter, and my other pieces are still free to move. Also, he still hasn't pressed the console. Nominally, it's just 1-0 so far, the score, but it will be very hard for him to actually get to my server with any of his pieces, and he also still needs to spend orders in his third turn pressing a console. And I can make that hard for him, so I will try to do that. After I spend an order on my Makaul to do that nice little CC with the Beast Hunter, I managed to put her down, which is nice. And then I finally get to say Ektros Brute, which means I can finally activate my Ektros. She moves down the building. She takes the Makaul with her, takes advantage of the fact that Karsten didn't leave his Hetkari in ARO, which I guess he probably should have done. Because this way I can just move up towards him. Yes, they get dodges, but it doesn't change the fact that I can, in the end, I think actually the Hetkari fails his dodge, peek around the corner and say, hey, I have a burst for Vulcan shotgun. We are inside 8 inches. Yes, he has, I think, a breaker pistol or something. And yes, he has marksmanship. And yes, he has BS attack -3, which means I'm just shooting at 13s, even though I am inside 8 inches. Because the first time I am able to move around the corner, I cannot move in a way that I get him out of cover. But it is enough to put a wound on him. And then I think I have to spend 2 more orders. I think the second order is inconclusive. And the last order manages to just straight put the Hetkari all the way into the dirt. And that makes me very happy. Not just because the Hetkari is dead, but also because my Ektros performed. And she did something. She killed a 54-point model, and she's only 32 points herself. So that's very nice. I think, however, that this is all I can do with my group 1. I think she spends all of the orders there. I would have wished to use my second turn to try and destroy one of the servers. A run with, for example, Aelis Kisan might have been possible, but I instead looked at the table and was like, I need to get rid of the Hetkari before I can do that, and I also need to do that before I can bring in my Gal Tarsos. So that is what I spend most of my orders on. My second group actually uses the Kalta chain of command, who is the lieutenant now, to bring in my speedball. She picks up the speedball, moves up to my Takiul, and revives the Takiul. The other speedball was the nano shield, and it got picked up by the Ektros on her way towards the Hetkari. But if I'm remembering correctly, she never had to do a saving roll against him. I spent the last order in my second combat group then just using a coordinated order to put the Tohaa as well as the Taku both into suppression fire, and then I pass turn. Karsten looks at the table and realizes that most likely he will not really be able to score any points anymore. He is able to now finally move up his hacker. He breaks out of the link, he uses the special irregular order, and he can almost freely move towards the same console that I moved to press my button. But I did stand up with her own irregular order my delegate. And so she has a flash pulse, and he has to tank that flash pulse, and he doesn't. And so while the hacker is able to boop the console, in that same order he does get stunned. And that is very unfortunate because he is actually in zone of control of my HVT. And we, funnily enough, just realized halfway through the game that we both had forgotten to place our HVTs. In my case, it was irrelevant since my classified was sabotage. But in his case, it was whatever the name is, but he had to spotlight the HVT twice. And so now you can see how sad it is that he got stunned, because in this case, it's a classified that you actually have to use the spotlight program, which is an attack. It's not a classified where you just have to do a whip roll, but it is actually the spotlight attack, and he couldn't do that anymore because he was stunned. So the classified is out of the question, and his only unit that he still has that theoretically would have been able to destroy a server was the Firefly. But the Firefly is simply too far away, and there are too many pieces between him and the servers. The Ekros is still there, my Macau is still there. There's a Chuksa with a heavy flamethrower on the way. And even though the Firefly has Karsten's second speedball, which was the jetpack, that won't save him. And he does some maneuvering, but in the end he just leaves the Firefly behind a building in the middle of the board by Pandra trying to lock down the path towards his servers. And so that means, yes, the game is already kind of decided by then, but I also still haven't destroyed any servers. So theoretically, the score is tied, so I still need to make points. And I can do that, though. I have my Gao-Tarsos, and she finally drops in outside of his deployment zone. I don't want to risk the combat jump, so I just parachute her in. And with a couple of orders, she at first is able to move out of the piece of cover where she's in and into line of sight of a mine that the Firefly laid earlier in the game. Fail the dodge, but I make the save. Then she moves further up and looks out of a corner to get line of sight to the Magistrate, who Karsten also moved in a way that he would be able to defend that server. That firefight also unfortunately does not go in Karsten's way. I am shooting my boarding shotgun inside of 16 inches, which is enough to put the Magistrate down as well. Karsten's by Pandra also failed all of her dodges out of line of sight to turn around and get a line of fire to my Gao-Tarsos. And so I can just freely move to the server on the upper side, which is the one that contains the rogue AI, put a decharge on it, and explode it, which is nice. That one works in one order. That's great. I move towards the building right next to it, which is the one I elected in the beginning, put a decharge on that, get my classified, and then I have enough orders to move up. And since basically his entire deployment zone is open space right now, I can also move into base to base with the server in the middle and place my last decharge on that one. However, in this case, Karsten makes all 3 saves on the server, and I'm not able to kill 2 servers, which doesn't matter because all I need to do in order to score all 10 points is have more servers than him, and I have that, and to kill the server with the rogue AI, which I also did, and have none of my servers killed, which is also the case. And that means, together with the classified, I made all the points that you can make in Mindwipe, and Karsten unfortunately was only able to press the console, so that's a 10-1 win for Toha. Now, end of the game analysis. Toha are great. I really liked playing them again. Yes, I also feel this game was very skewed when it came to dice. I feel like I made an unreasonable amount of crits, an unreasonable amount of dodges and armor saves, even though a bunch of them might have not mattered as much. Still, everything could have turned out very differently, right? my ARO pieces could have died much sooner, or at least be suppressed much sooner. You know, his runs with his irregular units could have been way more devastating. The Jackal attacking the Kaltar and the Chaksa with the template. The fact that I made those dodges was not very likely. That would have changed things a lot. He shot my sniper in the back. That also didn't work. All of that kind of stuff. His Beast Hunter putting a flamethrower over 3 of my units and killing none of them, even though my Sukyul already was out of a Symbiomate and already had taken a wound. Even the Makaul making its dodge. All of those things, at least to me, make it feel like it was a bit of an unfair game. But even apart from that, I have to say I feel very comfortable playing Toha. Even against a faction like Kestrel, their resilience is still, in my opinion, just as high as N4. With the fact that some units, some Symbio armor units have gotten even more viable, like the Gal Tarsos, for example, just means that I feel like I have even more pieces that are arriving on the table with 2 wounds. And that is just such a big difference. Like, if you compare Gal Tarsos to a Hellcat or a Tiger Soldier or any of those units that pay very similar points, the Hellcat Paramedic is 23 points. And yes, the Hellcat Paramedic is one of the best combat jumpers. But the fact that I have a second wound on something that just costs 1 point more, and yes, I don't have a deployable repeater, but I would just much rather have that resilience on my drop trooper to tank something. I could have even just landed right next to the mine and be like, well, okay, I'm gonna lose a wound. That's not the end of my run. And that to me just feels so valuable. And the fact that you have this on so many pieces, I think Toha are really, really strong still, and I really, really like playing them. I am planning on actually bringing them to the German Championship this year, the first time I'm gonna be there, and see how they perform there. And as for Kestrel, I think I already said everything about the list in the beginning. I think Karsten played it really well. Yes, there were a couple mistakes. I feel like he could have been a bit more aggressive, left his pieces, especially in the later game, in more aggressive ARO positions where they could utilize their incredible shooting abilities more. But he was also, like I said, just cursed with some really terrible dice this game. And there's really nothing you can do about that. And I have to give it to him. This guy has an amazing sportsmanship. He took it in stride. He never got tilted. And that is something I might not even be able to say about myself. I don't know how it would have been for me if those had been my dice. So really, really, really well done on his part. He played it straight all the way to the end. He played his outs and he tried his best. Most of the time, the dice were just not in his favor. And that is it. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, leave me a comment. Tell me what you liked, what you didn't like. If I made any mistakes, of course. I am, like I said, not a top player, so I'm really happy to learn. Every other feedback is welcome as well, and apart from that, I hope I can keep doing this, and that means we'll probably see each other another time. Bye-bye.